Hi, I'm Rigger. This is your right, and welcome back to Semblance. We are halfway through assembling Team Gift, our Christmas character counterparts. Both the Grinch and Scrooge have been built, and so far they're a hard bunch of serious guys who appear to almost be teetering on the edge of what you'd call good. Will this one fit that mold? Let's find out. Before we get started, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else you would like it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. On to today's subject. The third teammate is our adaptation of Frosty the Snowman. Good work to those who guessed it. I did see a lot of guesses for Jack Frost, which would be fun, except we already have Jacques, so yeah. Anyway, Frosty the Snowman. There's honestly not a whole lot to go off, really. Not the deepest character, but that's alright. Let's jump into the resemblance card and start assembling a snowman. Okay, first off is the name. I'm gonna be upfront with you here, I made this one female, for pretty much no reason except I wanted to. And then because we always say snowman, so my mind thought maybe it shouldn't be a man. Plus we've had two dudes so far, and there was a theme I wanted to use for this character that could obviously fit either male or female, but being female just seemed to fit it better. We'll get into that soon, but first a name. Honestly, I didn't go super deep on this one. I took it from Frosty's wife. Yeah, he gets a wife. Her name is Crystal, and that works. Crystal it is, and it'll play into something later too, actually. And secondly, we have another thing that stuck out in my writing tropes brain. Every time you have a female character based around ice, they're always fittingly cold and mean, at least to start. I mean, Weiss was, right? It goes with that whole thing, the frosty woman, the cold woman, right? That's like a trope, and let's not do that. So this is Frosty, and they're not like that. So I'm calling her Frost. It's on the nose, but it's also against the trope. She's literally Frost, but she's not Frosty. I mean, she is Frosty, but she's not. You get the point. And, best of all, they both have color connotations. Crystal can be any colors like crystals in the ground, but also there's things like crystal blue water is very common, and frost, snow, white, etc. Next is age and pronouns, and we already sort of know it's 18 and she, her. Next off is height. Okay, Frosty is tall, but for this story and what we're doing for this character, not so much. The others so far have been 6 foot and 6'4". So for this one, Crystal is the tiny one of the group. She's 5'1". Not a straight adaptation, but it works into what else we're doing, so it'll become clear later. Next is the weapon, and here's where I need to go into some design ideas a little bit early before we get to the actual design. Frosty alone doesn't have a ton of things to go off. I had a few options for direct weapons translation. There was the hat, but I didn't want to make odd job. He's often seen with a scarf, we could use that, but we already have a rope fighter in there with the chain fighting at least. There's his pipe, which we could adapt into something perhaps with a pipe, like a firearm, or adapt its shape into like a big hammer. We already have Nora arm, we don't want to be too close, so I went into the overall design of Frosty as I do with a lot of characters, also hoping that there'd be a secondary theme that would come out, something else you can give their character that doesn't have to be directly related to what they're based on. That certainly came up with Scrooge, where we had the whole martial arts thing in there, and it became its own part of his theming with the yin and yang and that kind of thing. So here I was looking at Frosty in the magic hat, and then it came from a magician. In the story it comes from a magician, and I like that theme, a magician. So let's lean into that for the overall theme of the character as well. So there was Frosty's broom. This was the other big thing I was going to go into as possibly a weapon. Going over to the weapon workshop now, see, I could try and turn the broom into an original weapon, like Clover's fishing rod, something that's not traditionally a weapon, but you could turn into one. But I thought about it more of like a broom shape. Not necessarily this one, but in the general shape of a broom, and also something that you sweep with, like sweeping motions. And then I thought that she's short and little, so some reach would be useful, a weapon that you could use at a bit of a distance to keep people away. Keeping that in mind, and the magician thing, I came up with this. So this is a cane, along the lines of a ringmaster's cane, with the magician circusy thing in mind. But also the shaft telescopes out a fair bit longer, and it has a hideaway segmented blade that pops out from the top to form this polearm. I'm basically calling it a glaive. It was more inspired by a guando, but it's not incredibly long like a normal glaive. It's closer to that martial arts length rather than a giant polearm, especially since she's short. If it was too big she couldn't handle it. So it's in the middle lengthwise. On the character sheet I'm calling it a glaive just because the head fits that shape more. On it, you'll notice this dragon head. Okay, so there is no reason for it from the Frosty story. Instead, it was inspired by this idea for this orb. I like the idea of the big orb on top, sort of the Ringmaster's style. It also reminded me of Canary from Hunter x Hunter. And then having a magic powerful orb, that also brings to mind just Eastern dragons and that whole Dragon Ball thing. So I thought I'd just combine them together here for a little flavour. So that big orb on top is about the size of your hand, if not slightly bigger, and there's a giant ice dust reservoir in there. In terms of story, it doesn't run out. Like in reality, yes, she probably has to refill it, but fictionally in story, it's like a magical ball she uses to cast ice dust attacks, and it doesn't run out, you don't have to like reload it mid-battle, but it's also not like rapid fire or anything. It's based on a similar principle to Carden's weapon, as it has a ball of fire dust inside, except this one launches its charges, or it can. She uses it basically to cast ice dust at people, sort of like a magic staff and little magic cane, which leans into the fact she's someone who is quite skilled with dust, especially ice dust. But also, when the blade pops out from this little Eastern dragon design where the mustache goes back through under the chin and forms like a flat plate, there's actually a collapsed blade in there that pops up and around to form the head of the glaive. And that glaive head is then in contact with that orb, which allows it to channel through the blade. That changes it from a ranged weapon to a more melee-focused weapon. It allows you to slice into opponents and then freeze from that point. Or you can also cover the blade in a build-up of ice, turning it into a less sharp, more non-lethal heavy smashing club, which will shatter on impact. Equally, in cane form, you can also whack people with that orb while it is in ranged mode, and freeze from contact with the orb, making it more of like a bludgeoning mace if need be. As for how it's controlled, I think it's fun that there actually is no obvious buttons or controls you can see, there's no triggers. It's like they're hidden on the staff, in the shaft of it and on the dragon's head, and only she knows where to press and twist to make it work, like a magic trick. So she can sit her hand on that orb and hold it just fine without freezing herself. You have to activate it, but she knows how to do it. But as you can imagine, this isn't the most lethal weapon. Yes, a fired ice spear, or a big smash of ice, or a bladed strike can of course kill anything if done right. But this is much more of a utility weapon, meaning that it has many non-lethal options and is used to control the battlefield more, or keep people at arm's length and change situations, keep people away, which will play into her character, and utilizing ice dust in a lot more ways than lethal, like freezing surfaces, etc. But yeah, I like this whole Eastern dragon with the orb thing, since her name is Frost too, and it looks like a dragon that is breathing icy attacks at you, or when the blade is popped out like a giant frozen, almost fang-looking blade, it is of course called Frostbite. I did initially make the shaft more of a brown, like a broom and like the snowman stick arms, but it looked a little weak and breakable, so to fit in better with the actual design, and since all the weapons in RWBY are kind of like a higher tech look to them, I went with the shiny black nondescript, probably metal pole. But anyway, back to the card. Next we do aura color, and I'm actually making hers an icy blue. We have white on the team, and it doesn't have to be white just cause snow, so blue I think is actually pretty nice and it blends in more with her first name. Next is Semblance. Okay, so I feel very pressured by it being Frosty to do a magic hat. Originally I was going to give them a really fun ice-based Semblance, but it's Frosty, I have to do the hat. So instead I modeled her weapon off a lot of ice potential, and that sort of helped me there, and we went back to doing the hat. Now, we haven't done the design yet, but spoilers, there's a hat, and it'll play into the magician thing again. As for what I'm calling the Semblance, well, pun. I'm calling it Hat Trick. Funnily enough, this Semblance doesn't have to be used with a hat, but with this character it always will be, so she named it that. What it does is it allows her to create a portal to a pocket space in an object. For her, she'll always make it the hat. Theoretically it can be other things, but for her it won't be. So basically, think of it similar to Fiona's Semblance, but it behaves quite differently and the rules are different. Fiona's has an insane level of storage, but it's slow and the rules here have specifics to them. For this Semblance, it's much faster and our rules have changed, and the space inside is different. With Fiona, she can put an entire truck in there. With this one, you couldn't. You can put things in the hat that are bigger than the hat, but the whole inside space is like the size of the inside of a big truck. You couldn't fit a big truck in it. I mean, you can put a lot inside the space of a big truck, but not also a big truck. She can carry all of her team's bags easy enough though, but it's much faster than Fiona's. It doesn't work by like breaking things down and putting them in storage. Basically it makes an active portal in the space where her hat is. So this has a lot of defensive capabilities. It's like an active portal you can go straight through. If you shoot at her, she can hold up her hat, and if the bullets pass through the portal, they'll just go through to that space harmlessly. Though for that to work, she'd also have to line it up right. It doesn't just suck things in from all around it, they have to touch it. But it has even more capabilities than that. If you try and stab her, she can hold up her hat, and your arm and your weapon will pass through the portal, stabbing into space, not her, on the other side. Because that's another thing. Living things can go in there, but there are huge asterisks next to that point, because there is no oxygen in there. The way the Semblance works is there's like a ritual she does with an object. This has to be done out of battle, this is a separate thing. So here is, she's chosen her hat, you choose an object, and you create the space. For that to be done, you probably have to pump aura into it, right? So you'd sit on the floor, you would get the object you want to infuse with this Semblance, and you would pump a full load of aura into it, from full to empty, and that creates the space. The size of that space is therefore dictated by how much aura you have, so if she had way more aura, the space on the other side could get bigger. Once that space is established, it doesn't need more aura to exist, it just exists as it is as a pocket. So it's not reliant on her aura to exist. Once the space is established, her further uses of aura simply work to open the portal in and out of that space. So what that means is there's good and bads here. Breaking her aura doesn't destroy the space. This is good because breaking her aura doesn't mean everything inside her hat will suddenly be dumped onto her head when that happens, probably killing her. It's bad because everything inside cannot be accessed again until she gets her aura back. Except there is an emergency option. If you destroy the object that the space is tied to, this being the hat, it'll destroy the space and eject everything back into the world. So for fun and conflict will make the hat very important to her, so it sets up that one day down the line there'll be a potential dramatic scene where she has to decide to destroy the hat or not when they desperately need something that's locked inside it after her aura breaks. But like I said, living things can pass through that doorway, but there is no oxygen on the other side, meaning can she kill people with this Semblance? Absolutely. She could trap people on the other side, close the gate, and they would suffocate and die in that space. But that's hard to do since you can step back and fight away from the portal. Obviously it doesn't just suck you in immediately, and she would never do that anyway. That's one of the things with her character, would put a wall up there. But there is one last trick that allows her to do. She can flex her aura in a certain way that actually allows her to travel through the space at a slight distance, just a small amount. She can get sucked in, unlike someone who is unwilling. But that means she can do some very neat little tricks that make her very hard to pin down. Such as, she can grab her hat in her hand and throw it, and at the last second when she throws it, flex her aura, she will vanish inside the hat, and she will pop back out of it when she wishes to. Now, while she does this trick, she has to hold her breath, and she has to have enough aura so that when she hits the other side of the portal, it doesn't break, and therefore she gets stuck on the other side and suffocates to death. But those caveats aside, it makes her pretty tricky. She can grab her hat, throw it across the room, vanish into the hat as it's thrown, and pop back out on the other side a second later. This is what makes her very tricky and hard to pin down. You can be slashing at her, like slashing at her midsection. You've got through a defense, she's dead to rights, your blade's about to hit her in the side, and she vanishes. And then a breath later, she will pop back out exactly where she was, assuming the hat hasn't fallen to the ground, or if it even has, she'll pop up from under it. That sounds really OP, but it's not because there are dangers to it. The portal back out is always the hat, and the hat remains in the space. That means she can't appear across a room or trick you. You know where she's going to pop out of if you know how the trick works. While that hat sits in midair or starts to fall, it's completely helpless. You could destroy it, which would eject her back into the world anyway, if you had the time. You also, if you knew how it worked, could stop your swing, and then she would pop back into reality into the space where the sword is. And that would be horrific. So she can't just do it all the time, and if you know how the trick works, that's pretty bad for her. And if she runs out of aura, well, there are issues with that too. It's a trick, and tricks don't always work on repetition, and they get less and less effective. But it can also be used in very, very useful ways. She can pop inside the hat and a teammate can throw it much farther and she just has to count in her head and hope she knows when she pops out. Or, if an enemy is disarmed, throw their weapon in the portal, confiscated. And remember, Glade has the ability to steal objects with his Semblance. So, if he gets his hand on your weapon and then steals it, he can throw it to her and she can send it through the portal to Netherspace and you can't get it back. Of course, then she's probably your target, and the hat is as well if you know how it works, but I digress, nothing's perfect. It's also why she doesn't carry much when you see her design soon, and where she can store a weapon when she doesn't feel like carrying it around. I also like it as a crazy landing strategy. I mean, she could use ice and other things, but imagine falling like at full force towards the ground, and at the last second she pops inside her hat. The hat lands on the ground and then she just pops back out standing. That's pretty funny. Which implies that the nether space on the other side of that portal harmlessly stops momentum like a massive slowdown, which would make sense as to how it can stop bullets without being torn apart, and you can stab into it without falling through the portal. So yeah, there's a big sort of slowdown on the other side. That makes a lot of sense. So that is Hat Trick. It's both complicated and simple. It's dangerous but also kind of wacky and fun. A magical hat indeed. It allows for much more wacky, fun, bouncy movement in combat, and as an interesting self-defense style. Trying to shoot or stab her and your bullets or arm just vanish through the air harmlessly where it should go through her is kind of interesting and visually cool, but you can always just pull it back. She also comedically might have to empty bullets and junk out of her hat once in a while, and that's kind of funny. Though I do think we'll put in an added rule here: she cannot close the portal with something halfway through. She can get sucked into it, so that works for her, but everything else, if your arm's through it, she can't close it and cut your arm off. And so now we're on to skills. 2 at once to start off is Sleight of Hand and Trickery. She's just generally really good. She's like a magician. She's really good with that hat. She can do hat tricks. She can roll along her arms, throw and catch it, etc. And generally she has like magician's hands, which is the second character like that on this team. Next is Acrobatics. She's good at avoiding you and getting places, also jumping around and flips and throwing hats and catching it in interesting ways, like, you know, very circusy. Next on there is Dust, meaning dust usage. She's not the strongest fighter. Melee combat is not on this list specifically, but she is talented at using dust, particularly ice dust. She's able to cast it in various ways and manipulate it, using it almost like in its raw form. Next is Hand-Eye Coordination. That again goes with all the other trick stuff, but also here, Diplomacy. She's a peacekeeper and a talker. Finally, this group has someone who can talk to other people, thank the brothers. The next 3 aren't so much skills as they are qualities, and they are optimism, empathy, and positivity. Thank everything we finally have a happy, positive, caring person on the squad. She's not the leader, but she might be the face of the team since the other 2 are quiet, scheming, serious types. No, not Frosty. Frosty is fun and bright and happy and doesn't want to fight. Finally, a character who isn't broody and edgy to mix up this squad. But let's go into flaws. Okay, for this I'm purposely playing into something. Frosty wasn't born yesterday, he was born today. If you get me. Yeah, she's 18, but she's too innocent, she's too trusting, she's overly sympathetic. Despite being a trickster in combat, you know, doing hand tricks, you could easily fool her emotionally. Pretend to be hurt, get her sympathy, pretend you've seen the error of your ways, etc. She'll probably buy it. She wants to buy it. And also with that, despite how skilled she is in some things, she actually has low self-confidence. Okay, Frosty didn't have low self-confidence, but she does. She's not a combat specialist, she isn't the greatest huntsman. Despite having really honed talents in some areas, she's unsure of herself. She probably has the skills to do it, but she doesn't know if she does. Definitely not leadership material, so the fact she's the one that talks isn't always great. She also struggles under pressure. She can be overwhelmed by high pressure, high stress scenarios. She can be indecisive, and she can freeze up. Haha, get it? She can't take the heat. She doesn't remain cool under pressure. You get me. But actually, she's the first on her team like that. The other 2 are very sure of themselves, so, you know, very different. But onto the design. Alright, let's do it. 3, 2, 1, go! Huh, interesting. Okay, usually I do from bottom to top, but we'll look at the overall design for now. First off, I know, how on the nose with the snowman white and the coal buttons, but Frosty doesn't actually have that. It's more just a generic snowman look to give the idea of where it comes from. But that and the black and white color scheme immediately also brought to mind Atlas. I did the design first and then I went, no, this is definitely Atlas. I know it's cliche because snow, but she's most definitely from Atlas and that'll come out in her backstory. It's not snowman gear, it's an Atlas look. It looks exactly like what they wear. Also, as is pretty obvious, it's very unarmored. Looking at, say, perhaps the tights almost looking on her legs. First, that plays into the acrobatic movements, and Frosty didn't have legs, but it does sort of fit with her very acrobatic movements and that kind of thing. But also, yeah, no armor, it plays into characters' themes. That this does not look like a combat-ready person. They look innocent and positive and trusting. They're not strapped for war. But also, they are hiding things in their hat, they don't have to store things all over their body, so we have a sleeker look. We have a thin and average build, not a bruiser by any means. The big belt is actually modeled really like Santa, but it really does look like Atlas stuff. She even has the white shell plain slip-on shoes. They're not combat boots, but it also allows her a lot of freedom of movement and to jump around, etc. We're playing on that innocent thing once again though. She even has frills on the bottom of her coat hem. Of course, there's a snowman shape with it curving out too. Simple and smooth arms too with the sleeves. Good for doing hat tricks like rolling things along it and having lots of movements and spinning her weapon around. But again, no armor to speak of. Keeping the design also quite basic and streamlined and symmetrical also plays into that idea that this is more an outfit than a huntsman uniform. I wanted to keep Frosty's scarf that he often has, but there's no need to dress for the cold all the time and I didn't want to play into it that much, so instead I made it more of a cravat to play into more that ringleader thing, that formality thing. I took the colours for the design straight from Frosty's flower, so that's all the same. And since her name is Crystal, and her aura is blue, and she uses ice dust, why not put a crystal blue pin in it? You know, looks formal. For her hair, I actually wanted something normal and brown here. Limitless Design says make her ice themed so she has white hair, but we already have that, and why do it always the same? Or blue hair. But I wanted to maintain that very normal, down-to-earth, brown-haired person look. Take some of the fantasy out of it. It also gets some brown in the design, like from the broomstick to the pipe there was hints of brown, so we get some in it here, and the eyebrows and stuff match. I didn't know what colour to make the eyes, but rather than go for a white or a blue or a black, pink is a little more unique and pops with her cravat there, so why not? The hat is pretty much unchanged from actual Frosty's, except it's got a stiffer, more magician's-like brim with, you know, consistency for tricks and rolling it and throwing it. Also, it's purposely a little too big, so it sits more on the back of her head, so it pushes her ears forward and runs down behind the back of her head. That's on purpose because it means that there's a slightly bigger portal there, and it also works to try and create a more childlike, innocent look, as if it's slightly too big for her. The same also goes into the idea of her hair just being worn down, just normal and tucked behind the ears. It creates a more childlike, innocent look, and it speaks to not really being set up for combat. But also, this is a tricky character, so just because I'm saying they don't have armor and they aren't really dressed for combat, it does speak to their personality, but they're not completely useless in a fight. They have all their tricks and, you know, everything they do. So it is a little bit deceptive. But from there, let's go into her character. What's her personality? So she's very cheery and bright. She's very invested in those around her and encouraging. She's the bright spark on the team. She's the one saying, don't give up, it'll be alright, I believe in you, we'll get them next time. She's the heart and soul of the team, despite being far from the strongest. She is a nod to a Cindy Lou Who, a Tiny Tim. She is that role for them. She is the part of this team that mellows Glade and Ink a bit. She pulls some of those people back to earth. And I don't know if there'll be a romance or anything in the team that wasn't really planned out, but it doesn't really matter. She's the one who'll pull them together like a family and work to mellow their hearts. It'll be her. At first she might be a little annoying to them because she does not fit their personalities, and she isn't totally wired and bouncing off the walls like Nora or anything. She's just bright and happy and innocent and positive. Something other than what the other two are, something they lack almost entirely except under specific circumstances. Which is going into her next part, which is she truly believes in improving the world. She has that as her own lofty goal, to do good and make a difference. That's how she stays positive even in the dark and scary times and facing the dark and scary things. She doesn't see that as the grim reality she should come down to earth and face. She sees it as something they should change for the better. It might be reality but doesn't have to stay that way. Let's stay positive, let's keep going. Rather than despair at how bad it is, she sees that as the low benchmark that it's her job, role and destiny to improve, and that they can do because she believes in her team and their cause. One of those people who says, I believe we can do this not because I'm strong, but because I know how strong those around me are. Because she has some of those confidence issues, she doesn't always believe in herself, but she believes in them. However, she has difficulty in intense situations. She may be positive, but she can panic or she can be lost on how to help since she doesn't always feel like she's the most capable. And she does sometimes have a hard time reading social subtleties as well. She's happy and bright, so sometimes she fails to read the room a little. If she's being serious, like that diplomacy I mentioned earlier, if she's heading into a situation where she knows she has to try and diffuse things, she'll pay attention and read the room and be generally pretty good at that kind of thing. But in general conversation, as she's just walking around talking to people, she might miss snide remarks or things that are sort of reading between the lines every now and then. As said, she can also get overwhelmed and flustered too, not just in combat, but in high-pressure situations even socially. She's good at helping others feel better, but she's not so good at looking inwards when pressured, and she doesn't process her own emotions very well when they vary off her usual. When she's hit with emotions she's not used to, like something came crashing down in a devastating way emotionally for her, she wouldn't know how to process that. Same for like romantic situations or like truly bitter, blood-boiled rage situations, any of those extremes, she does not handle very well when it's concerning herself. Next is goals and allegiances. So, she truly believes in the best for humanity and seeks to help others. Someone who truly believes that deep down, people, everyone, is primarily a good person, and those that aren't or do wrong need help, and she seeks to help anyone in need she can. She'll help you cross the road or try her best to face down the oncoming wave of grim, whatever need be. If put under extreme circumstance, her emotional ties will win out over instruction. That's just there, meaning that if people she respected and admired who are her superiors told her one thing, and her teammates and loved ones told her another, when push came to shove if she had to choose, she would go with her friends and family. And yeah, she wishes to redeem wrongdoers if she can. If she can help them, even if she thinks that's through jail time, truly believing in rehabilitation and so forth, she'll do what she can. It seems doubtful she could ever bring herself to kill another person, which might eventually come up in story, who knows. This seems like a character who could go through quite a lot over the course of a story, and face a lot of hardships. So, background. I think her parents managed to move up from Mantle to Atlas before having her. I think that they probably were involved in some kind of dust tech breakthrough. Like, they're not Pietro, they're not super geniuses on his level, but they might work in his department. Perhaps even something along the lines that allowed them to create a system like what Frostbite uses with its dust orb. Let's say they invented how some of that works. Something that big would elevate them out of Mantle up above to help with Atlas. That's why I think she has the weapon she does. Her parents probably made it. And the dust skill she has because her parents are very versed in it and she learned from them. And why her outfit is an Atlesian Huntress style, because they got it for her. And as such, she was born in Atlas, but she grew up with humble parents who came from harsh beginnings, who were well aware of how lucky they were with their lives, and that things worked out this way, and they raised their daughter to have those values, not to be content with the comfortable life she had, but recognize how lucky they were to be there. It was a privilege to be in Atlas, and not to forget those below who were in need. These are some of the really few charitable people that live up there because they came into that society, they weren't raised in it. So Crystal never had to live in struggle. She has a good, comfortable life, but she has a drive that she has to help others less fortunate because they're just like her parents. You know, they could be her parents. She needs to help people. She should do all these things. As such, she helped with charities, she went down to Mantle frequently to help out with anything she could do. She absolutely was involved down there. She walked through the hard streets and faced people who were not friendly to her because of where she came from, or accused her of not belonging and trying to make herself feel better, etc. She encountered resistance and saw bad things, but you couldn't deny at the end of the day she went home to a nice, warm, comfortable bed in Atlas. Her goal is to work so everyone can have it better and feel that same appreciation and comfort her parents do. Upon discovering her semblance, then, she realized she could be a huntsman. I think that the hat was a special gift. I'm not sure if it was from her parents or a relative who passed away, or perhaps even better, from someone she helped down in Mantle, say like an old woman who had it and it had been passed down through that woman's family. Then she gives it to Crystal as thanks for helping her, since that lady has no more family to pass it down to and her family dies with her. And then perhaps she did pass away, so it's like a treasured gift that was the first sign that she was doing the right thing and helping people and people appreciated her for it. But then, treasuring the hat for so long, one day the portal in it opens when she needs a way to carry things, say for a charity drive, and she's unwittingly done the ritual with the hat over time, not realizing that she's done it, and that's how she first discovers her semblance. But once she realized she could be a huntress, she concludes that it's an active way to help everyone and keep people safe, which is her ultimate goal. But she's quite aware of how Atlas works living there, and she asks her parents if she could instead study abroad, as she has no interest in going into the military side of things, or being pressured to do so. Her parents, who achieved their dream and pulled themselves out of hardship and into Atlas, really believe that everyone should be given the chance to chase their dreams. So if this is her dream and what she really wants, they agree and fund her heading to Haven instead. She also keeps that in mind while being at school, that it's a privilege to be here due to her family's charity. And lastly, some quirks. Frosty's from a musical, let's make it she loves singing. something cute for her to do. And yeah, look, Weiss is also a singer, but Crystal isn't famous for singing. She just likes singing and sings to herself out loud sometimes, and she's good at it. She hates the heat. She was raised in Atlas like Weiss, but she would go to Mantle frequently, and she was acclimatized to the cool. She didn't live in absolute comfort all the time, and she didn't leave herself in that sort of situation. So she actually is acclimatized to the cold, and Mistral is not that. Just like Frosty melts in the heat. Which is also why she refuses any more layers or bulky heavy things like armor. Yuck. Let's also put in here that she wishes she was physically stronger. It's good for some gags of her struggling with things, but also plays into her adoration for her helpful teammates, especially people like Ink, who is incredibly strong. And that plays into getting on his good side, even in just a small way, because he likes people who value him for his capabilities. In a team of so far 2 really rough and tough dudes, she's the furthest thing from that. But she has a way of worming her way into everyone's heart. And just to play on her innocence card, we'll say she sometimes says inappropriate phrases or jokes without knowing it. Not knowing some double meanings of words, etc., not having a dirty mind at all, and she just sometimes doesn't realize what she's saying. It's cute, and you can get moments of comedy out of it, and you can get moments of her or others getting embarrassed when they have to explain it to her, or being lost when others start laughing. Just some fun social stuff that speaks to how she was brought up, the environment in which she was brought up, and the fact that she's the mouth of the team, and this kind of thing happens, and the others have to deal with it because they're not talky types. So, yeah, just leads to some interesting situations and some fun. Okay, and there we go, Crystal is official. Now the team dynamic is really shaken up. Also, remember, Glade doesn't take praise well, and now he's stuck with a very encouraging, reassuring, positive little bright spark. As for pairs, well, if it matters who was in a pair before they went to a group, since we sort of do that kind of thing, it was definitely Glade and Crystal, and Inks will be our last member. She's a Cindy Lou Who for him, but that doesn't matter once the team is assembled, and I think that her and Ink will actually form a pretty strong bond, because she has the positive you can do it attitude, and he has his desire to be the best there ever was. They feed each other perfectly. She just can't get behind all the violence and rage side of him, but she can help to mellow it. All these things to balance out the other two's issues. Finally they have someone to talk for them, though what she says might not be how they'd say it, since they are not that type of person. Glade has a tendency to lead towards underhanded tactics and anything to wing attitude, but here you have a heart and soul of the team who might have some moral issues with some of that and sort of mellow out some of those tendencies. Also, while she isn't a child, she has childlike qualities that might speak to Glade too, seeing someone who grew up and avoided becoming how he is, which is what he wants for other people, even being a huntsman in training. But also, unlike the others, she hasn't really faced the hardships growing up that they have, so those two might see her as being quite a bit naive from what they've seen. So there's some big interesting team dynamics happening. She can be that tiny Tim for Ink, that heart and soul that can get through to him. She can be the Cindy Lou Who for Glade, that again, warm soul who gets through to him, but in different ways, and the way she acts might cause some friction with the other two. But also the other two have issues that pull them towards some darker stuff, and she can be the heart to pull them back. You can really see how this team might become a family, which as discussed in the other two is what they really need. But that's all for now. Thank you for joining me once again. Please show some love and like the video if you liked it, share it if you think others would like it, and let me know what you thought of it in the comments. Until next time, my name is Rigger, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas break, and I hope I did alright.